Hello again, everybody. It's Laurie White with the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to episode number 203 of Chamber TV. And today we are talking about offshore wind and its potential for Rhode Island to, in fact, lead the nation, as we already are, as a matter of fact, and some very exciting developments today in Providence. And our guest is David Hardy. And David is the CEO of Ørsted Americas, and he is here today to talk about what a wonderful day we had in Providence today as we were getting ready to launch the next series of wind turbines going into South Fork and off the East Coast. So, David, welcome to Chamber TV. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Laurie. It's great to be here. Great to be with the Greater Providence Chamber and to talk about offshore wind and how excited we are to be here in Rhode Island.
So tell us a little bit about Ørsted, first and foremost, just to get us sort of situated and leading supplier and generator of offshore wind turbines, leading East Coast provider, but certainly your roots are in Europe and other places where offshore wind has had a little bit of a head start on the U.S.
Yeah, let me start with just a little background about Ørsted, and then I'll talk about Ørsted here in the Americas. So first, Ørsted is a Danish company, publicly traded on the Danish Stock Exchange. We are the largest offshore wind developer in the world. We built the world's first offshore wind farm more than 30 years ago off the coast of Denmark. And since then, we've had numerous largest offshore wind projects because the projects keep getting bigger. We develop, construct, and operate wind farms. We don't actually produce any equipment per se. We buy things from people and we build projects and we operate them. Here in the U.S., we have a large offshore presence. We're the largest American offshore wind developer and soon to be, well, we operate already, but soon to operate even more. We've got the Block Island wind farm we own now and operate that. That's the country's first offshore wind project, and it's off the coast of Block Island, Rhode Island. So real precedent for the state. And then we have, that's 30 megawatts, 5 turbines of 6 megawatts each. And then we're building 5 gigawatts of projects off the coast of the east coast of the U.S. across multiple states. This summer, we're building the South Fork wind project off the coast of, really between Montauk and Martha's Vineyard, but the power will go into Long Island. And then shortly thereafter, we're building Rhode Island's project, the Revolution Wind Project, basically in the same general seabed area as South Fork. And then we have other projects in New England and off the coast of New Jersey and off the coast of Maryland. In addition to offshore wind, we actually build onshore wind and solar, and we have a growing green fuels business. And I'm responsible for all the scopes for Ørsted here in the U.S. I like to brag and say that we're actually one of the largest deployers of capital in the green energy transition. That's something I'm proud to say. Although we're not a household name, we are really on the forefront of the energy transition and deploying billions of dollars each year into the energy transition, primarily in offshore wind, but actually pretty sizable in other technologies as well.
So before we look at the video of today's very impressive ceremony, tell us a little bit about Ørsted's favorability towards Rhode Island, if you will, and the degree to which we really have charted a path for ourselves, Rhode Island, that is, as a leader. And I love the way you marry the concepts of our manufacturing history, our maritime history, and our ability in the design and the fabrication of various components. Those three elements coming together really nicely to really, sort of underscore our economic underpinnings from the last century or so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Rhode Island has been, a leader in the manufacturing industrialization movement, literally, hundreds of years ago. Obviously has a long history in the maritime industries. And I think offshore wind is a good combination of both of those. Rhode Island also has been, on the forefront of offshore wind from the beginning of time. The Block Island wind farm, which we've talked about already, was built in 2016 and it was the first offshore wind project in America. And so that's something that can never be taken away. The first project built in America, and something for Rhode Islanders to be proud of. But Ørsted has been committed to Rhode Island since we came into the offshore wind sector here in the U.S. We've got a large engineering and project management and engineering, procurement, and construction team here in Providence. We've got an office here with 80 to 100 white collar workers, and we expect that office to grow. And then we've been investing in the state. We've got operation and maintenance folks, operating the Block Island Wind Farm, but we will continue in our Quonset location. We'll continue to invest in operation and maintenance people and resources there as we build out the rest of the eastern seaboard. We'll have techs and support in that location. And likewise, we're investing in the state on the manufacturing side. So we've announced contracts for specialized vessels to be built by Rhode Island companies. And then today we had the big event where we were building what we call advanced foundation components, which are part of the foundation of the next generation of offshore wind farms.
So with that, let's take a look at some of the scenes from today's news conference. So why don't you narrate for us, David, and tell us what we're looking at?
Sure. At the event today in Provport, we were highlighting some significant progress that we've made, basically completing 3 different sets of components, which are broadly called the advanced foundation components, which are part of the foundation of the wind farms. But we've completed the 12 sets of 3 different components for the South Fork Wind Project, and then we've started construction on the 65 turbine sets of advanced foundation components for the Revolution Wind Project. So this first picture here, where you see these platforms, these are external platforms that kind of sit on top of the monopile foundation that have a crane, and here you can lift up equipment, lift up workers, and this is like a platform that goes around the outside of the foundation. In the other picture in the background there, you see these internal platforms. These go actually down inside the monopile foundation. They're about 40 feet tall, tons of steel and metal. And we talk about that these have the communications and electronic sensors and the cables and things. So these are kind of the brains of the foundation that connect the turbine up tower down into the foundation and down to the seabed where the cable will be running. And there's a third component that you may or may not have a picture of, but it's the anode cages, which sit outside the foundation component and are there to be basically a sacrificial anode to help minimize the corrosion on the actual steel foundation itself. So.
Reminds me a little bit of the manufacture of submarine components down at Electric Boat. We've been there, and it's interesting that submarines are very horizontal apparatus, but they're built with verticality. So they're the tubes. They're stuffing the tubes essentially, and it looks a lot like the fabrication of the foundation jackets that you're talking about.
You may or may not know from my history, but I worked in the submarine community in the Navy way back when I was in, and so I see the similarities. There's platforms and ladders and metal fabrication for sure. There's a lot of similarities.
So what's changed in the last few years since what was originally known as deepwater wind went into the ground, into the seabed? I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. I remember sitting on the beach one day watching the barges bring out the turbines, and it was really a beautiful sight. But I'm wondering how have things changed in the industry since then? Has there been a tremendous amount of innovation in either the way the turbines generate power or the degree to which the seabed needs to be prepped to be ready for such massive investment?
Definitely, the technology has been continuing to evolve from that time, and also the environment here in the U.S. more from a policy and economic stimulus kind of background has evolved quite significantly. That project, I give all those guys credit that were able to build that first project, but that project was built with relatively small turbines, relatively simple project, just 5 turbines, 6 megawatt machines each. in-state water, so they didn't have to deal with the federal permitting challenges and other things. But since then, we've been working on developing and maturing the industry. There's been quite positive demand signals from New England states, not least Rhode Island, but also Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, et cetera. And so there's been a lot more excitement about the offshore wind industry. And with those demand signals, and then also getting policy support in Washington, it's created a real buzz around the industry, and it's attracted a lot of foreign domestic investment, like companies like ours, but also others to come into the space and make investments in the U.S. And I think the Biden administration and a lot of these states have recognized the both the benefits of the green electrons and the mitigating this really existential threat of climate change, but also the economic benefit of being able to create local, domestic, high-paying jobs, both in the manufacturing, construction, and eventual operation and maintenance of these projects. And Rhode Island in particular has been, like I said, a hub for us. And with the Revolution Wind project, which we hope to get our final federal permit later this summer and start onshore construction this year and offshore construction next year. And then hopefully with the Revolution 2 project that we most recently submitted as a bid into Rhode Island, we'll be able to continue to help Rhode Island progress. But right now there's somewhere around 17, 18 gigawatts, so 17 or 18,000 megawatts of offshore wind projects that have been awarded along the East Coast, compared to the 30 megawatts that make up Block Island Wind Farm. And today's turbines, when we look at Revolution Wind, those will probably be 11 megawatt machines versus the 6 megawatt Block Island turbines. And the bid for Revolution 2 are likely higher, up in the 15 to 18 megawatt size turbines. So the turbines are getting bigger. That leads to actually better economics and lower costs for ratepayers. But it's a challenging and exciting time, and we look forward to just continuing to move the industry forward. So.
Yeah, so the turbines are getting bigger and more efficient, and we're talking about Revolution Project 1 and 2, but what's originally envisioned is very soon more than 200,000 Rhode Island homes will in fact be fueled by this type of clean energy. How does that happen in terms of, what should the average homeowner know about how their power is sourced and the degree to which they feel some sense of pride that we are meeting our clean energy goals and our targets under the Climate Act?
Well, I hope that the average homeowner won't notice anything different. They flip the switch and the lights come on, and in fact, the Block Island Wind Farm actually created more resiliency on the grid for Block Island for sure. But even some of the power from the Block Island Wind Farm flows through Block Island and onto the mainland. And so these projects will do the same, where we will make upgrades to the existing grid to ensure it can receive the power. We build the offshore wind generation, and then we build a bespoke transmission system that brings the power from the wind farm onto shore and connects it into the grid. But the difference will be that instead of natural gas or coal, the power that's now flowing into everyone's home will come from clean wind energy, and a portion of the components and some of the equipment used to manufacture and maintain these projects will actually be built here in Rhode Island, and it will create new jobs for folks and high paying jobs in our sector. So we're very focused on reliability and safety, just like any other generating source. And offshore wind has one of the least intermittencies has the least intermittency of any renewable energy. So it blows pretty consistently offshore, and we're able to generate a lot of clean power with offshore wind.
Yes, it was interesting today. We were all gathered under a tent on the docks at Proudport, and the wind was certainly howling through the press conference, and everybody was sort of being lighthearted about the fact that the wind really does blow. So that raises the question. It is sort of serendipitous, if you will, that the combination of Rhode Island's location and the seabed and the ability to harness the particular type of wind that you're looking for is all in great supply within a short distance of the Rhode Island coast, right?
That's correct. One of my colleagues in the industry called it the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind. Is kind of the outer continental shelf here up in the Northeast. We have really high average wind speed, which is power production as a cubed function of wind speed. So if your wind speed doubles, your power production is 8 times as much. So the wind speed matters a lot, and how cost effective offshore wind is. And you have really high offshore wind speeds here in these lease areas that we're building these projects in, and you have relatively shallow water, and so that allows us to build relatively inexpensive and less complex foundations, and then you're relatively close to shore, far enough away that it's not right on top of everybody, so the visual impact is minimal. You will be able to see them occasionally on a clear day, but in general they're far enough offshore that they're much further offshore than the Block Island wind farm, and so not very much visual impact as well, but relatively close to shore, so we can get the power back to shore in a cost-effective way, all leading to basically cost-effective offshore wind power, and also why you see offshore wind gaining traction here in the U.S. and in Rhode Island.
Picking up on your comment on climate change, what have you noticed in the last few years, as an example, as more extreme weather precipitated by what we see as climate change impacts? How is that either favorably or disfavorably impacted the offshore wind industry? I'm guessing that the frequency of storms and the ferocity, if you will, is all good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't claim to be a climate scientist, so I don't quote me on all the expertise on this, but I think even the average citizen can see the number of storms, the wildfires out west, the droughts, then the really intensive rain, really intensive snow. This past season in Utah, I'm a skier, I like that, but it's unusual, and so we just see these bigger flexibilities happening in weather, and that can clearly be attributed to climate change. And as the temperature rises, the sea levels will rise, and for a state like Rhode Island, that could be a real risk. And so I think it's something that we all need to take seriously. In general, I've been working in renewables since 2010 in one form or another. I've been at Ørsted here for a little over 3 years, but before that I was also working in Europe and here in the US on onshore wind projects, and a little bit of offshore. And you definitely have seen a shift now in kind of the majority of people actually believing that the climate crisis is real and wanting to do something about it, and it becoming more widely accepted. And even on both sides of the aisle, there's actually quite a few conservative champions who see the benefits of offshore wind and building energy security, energy independence, and also benefiting from the economic benefits of offshore wind. Remember that we're building the offshore wind farms, but we're also building all kinds of U.S. infrastructure. We're investing in ports. You saw the investment today, the building and some of the hardening of the facility, the port there. But up and down the East Coast, there's investments in ports, there's investments in vessels, and other infrastructure that is basically good for America. And so I think you start to see more broad acceptance of a need for us to take action.
As you know, the Chamber was an early adopter of offshore wind and seeing its potential for Rhode Island. And at the time, we were talking about the many benefits, but one of the ones that perhaps was underappreciated at the time was the investment that would be made in the grid. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a very sexy concept, but we can all remember days and times when we're sitting here in the peak of summer and everybody's air conditioning goes on and there are rolling brownouts, and not as much here on the East Coast as perhaps on the West Coast, but it underscores the notion of in making sure that the investments in our existing grid structure allows for the reliable, consistent, and transmission of power during, peak times, right?
That's correct. And for every offshore wind project, like I said, we build the generating plant, which is the actual wind turbines offshore and the inter-array system that connects them all. There's usually an offshore wind substation out there where we condition the power and sometimes step it up or step it down. And then we export the power to shore, and we have an onshore substation. And all of that is in our scope. And probably people, think that most people think about the turbines offshore, but there's actually quite a bit of electrical transmission infrastructure that goes into both the offshore part and the onshore part. But then we also are financially responsible for pretty significant grid upgrades to the existing grid that we pay for. So when you see the price of offshore wind, it includes some significant upgrades to the onshore grid, and that's typically done, by the local utility, but we pay for it. And so across our whole portfolio, from Maryland up here to Rhode Island, we're spending, hundreds of millions of dollars on grid infrastructure, on all of the existing grid, in order to make it more robust and in order to bring the power into the grid. So, and especially as these coastal communities and the grid kind of closest to shore is sometimes some of the weakest part of the grid. So we're really making that part of the grid much more robust and reliable.
We're talking to David Hardy, who is the CEO of the Americas for Ørsted, and we're talking about renewable energy. And David, I wanted to ask you in the couple of minutes that we have left, the notion of the ESG, the tenets of ESG, and the chamber is very much immersed in ESG programming these days, and we have launched a rather substantive effort. But in reading some of your materials, the importance of what is described as a just transition, in terms of recognizing the foundational roles of oil and gas, and how those industries will play catch up, if you will, or begin to transition, and find other ways to tap into the whole renewable clean energy spirit. Speak for a little bit about what you see, or what your definition of just transition is.
Sure. I think maybe a little bit of context first. So Ørsted used to be called Danish Oil and Natural Gas. It was an acronym called Dong Energy. It wasn't the best name for a company here in the US, but about 10 or 12 years ago, the management team at the group made a conscious decision to transition away from fossil fuels and focus 100% on renewable energy. And this is where we really doubled down on offshore wind. And even though I said earlier, we had built the first project more than 30 years ago, this is where we really were deploying capital into the development of offshore wind. And we sometimes like to think of ourselves as the Tesla of offshore wind. All the materials were there to build an offshore wind farm, but we were the ones who took the risk to do it first. And then a lot of companies are fast following now, just like Tesla was the first to build an electric vehicle, and a lot of companies are following them. And we have a company vision of a world that runs entirely on green energy. So we want people to fast follow us. We want to see other oil and gas companies, follow the path that we made in transitioning to offshore wind. But we also are trying to keep our lead and take advantage of that 30-year head start that we have. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by staying focused on things other than just the green electrons. Of course, that's important. We just spent time talking about the impact to climate and other things, but you can build an offshore wind farm many different ways. You can build it in a kind of a industrial power plant at sea view, or you can build it in harmony with society. And so we're really focused on trying to build this industry from scratch and do it right. And that means building it in a way where we're leaving a net positive biodiversity impact on all of our projects. So we spend probably a little bit more than others to make sure that the biodomestic impact of the project, environmental impact of the project is positive. We also have made a commitment to recycle all of our turbine blades and the whole turbine itself. We, quite frankly, on our onshore solar side, we've done the same there too. We've committed to recycle solar panels et cetera. But on the workforce side, we also are very focused on making sure that as we build this industry from the ground up, that we make investments to bring in all types of people into the industry, and that we're investing in training programs and pre-apprenticeship programs. We have a landmark agreement with the National Building Trades that all of our projects will be built with union labor. And then within that agreement, we actually have a higher standard for people, bringing in people of color and women into the industry. And we're spending on all of our projects. We've got earmarked monies for development programs and training programs to try to make sure that we're having a strong impact on the communities that we work in and work with, and trying to develop opportunity for all in our industry.
So as we say goodbye, let me just say thank you so much for the $100 million investment in Rhode Island. We are so proud that Rhode Island is home, is the birthplace of offshore wind, and the supply chain jobs are plentiful, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with our friends in the building trades and the labor community. We are strong partners on all of the major projects in Rhode Island with the building trades. And like you, we have a firm belief that these types of jobs are good jobs with positive trajectory, benefits, and also a career ladder. So anything you'd like to leave us with, David, as we head out?
I'll just thank you, Laurie, for your support and the Chamber's support, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to everyone today. We do really enjoy our position here in Rhode Island. We look forward to hopefully building Revolution 2 as well as Revolution 1. Revolution 1, like I said, we're hoping to get our final permit and start our onshore construction later this year, and have the project producing power maybe by the end of next year. And then hope to hear some positive news about our most recent bid to build a second project in Rhode Island and continue to make investments. The $100 million, is just the investment we made at Port. We've already, like I said, have our white collar team here in Providence. We have made investments in shipbuilding, so it's a lot more than $100 million already, but we can do a lot more as we continue to advance the offshore wind program here for Rhode Island. So just look forward to continue to partner with you and the Chamber and the state, and thankful for the support of the governor and other state officials, as well as the federal delegation from Rhode Island, who have all been very, very supportive of Ørsted and our projects here.
So fantastic. We are excited to know that a second project is underway or in the conceptual stages. Thank you for previewing that with us just a little bit, and we stand ready to be a partner with you as we go forward. So with that, thank you, David Hardy, and thank you, everybody. This has been episode number 203 of Chamber TV. We will catch you next time.
Thank you.